You're tuned in to Beyond the Known.
In the 1930s, a British embassy worker named Miss Lois Jessup took a tour of the Hypogeum, an ancient underground temple carved into the bedrock of Malta. But what started as a routine visit turned into something far stranger. A guide led her to a chamber normally off-limits to tourists. There, she crawled through a narrow passage into a lower vault and saw movement. Down a dim corridor, she glimpsed them. Tall, thin, humanoid figures walking silently in single file, then vanishing into darkness. She fled in terror. Days later, when she returned to the site, she was told that the tunnel no longer existed, and no one would speak of what she'd seen. Was it a hallucination, a forgotten race in hiding, or a glimpse into a deeper reality, one buried far beneath our official history? In this episode, we descend into the world of ancient giants, from the sealed temples of Malta to the red-haired cannibals of Nevada to the vanishing bones of North America. Were giants real? And if so, who or what erased them?
Wow. That opening account from Miss Jessup is, well, it's genuinely unsettling, isn't it? It really sets the stage perfectly for the questions we're looking into today.
It really does. It grabs you immediately.
So in this episode, we're going to be taking a pretty expensive journey. We'll look at historical accounts, folklore, and, the scientific perspectives that all kind of swirl around this enduring belief in giant humans.
Right. It's a topic that pops up everywhere in so many different forms.
Exactly. And our goal here really is to give you, the listener, a thorough, balanced look at the information we've gathered in our research. We want to lay it all out so you can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, because the evidence, as you'll see, is, well, it's often really intriguing, but just as often, it's contradictory. It definitely makes you think.
Definitely. It's thought-provoking stuff. So let's get started. Let's unpack this fascinating topic together. Okay, so our journey begins in the Mediterranean. We're heading to the island of Malta, and specifically to this incredible place called the Hypogeum.
The Hypogeum. Even the name sounds mysterious.
It really does. And this isn't just some old ruin, it's a Neolithic temple complex.
Yeah.
Our research shows it's over 5,000 years old.
5,000 years? Wow.
Yeah, incredible, right? And the amazing part is, it wasn't built in the traditional sense. It was carved, deep down into the actual bedrock, an underground temple.
So not built on the earth, but into it. That's amazing engineering for that period.
Absolutely. And our research highlights it was clearly a site for some pretty sophisticated rituals. It suggests the people who created it likely had a deeper understanding of things like astronomy, geometry, maybe even advanced mathematics than we usually give Neolithic people credit for.
That challenges a lot of standard assumptions about the time.
It does. We even found references to things called libation holes within the Hypogeum.
Libation holes, what were they supposedly for?
Well, theories range, Some suggest they might have held wooden stakes, maybe with animal skulls on them.
Ritualistic.
Or perhaps they were used for liquid offerings during, ritual feasting. It paints a picture of a place that was really active, a living ceremonial center, but always with this palpable sense of mystery surrounding it.
And it's exactly those mysteries that lead us to some of the more extraordinary claims tied to the Hypogeum, right?
Precisely.
Our research turned up these reports of oversized skulls allegedly found there.
Oversized skulls? How oversized?
Described as having unusual elongations, sort of. Strange features that don't quite fit the standard descriptions of human anatomy.
Elongated skulls. That pops up in other ancient mysteries too, doesn't it?
It does. And what makes this even more curious or suspicious, depending on your viewpoint, is that these skulls are now reportedly missing. They're not available for public viewing or, seemingly, for independent study.
Missing. Okay, that definitely adds a layer of enigma. Fuels the speculation, I bet.
Absolutely. But, as we heard in that opening, it's really Miss Lois Jessup's account from the 1930s that stands out. She was a British embassy worker in Malta at the time.
Right, not just a casual tourist, someone with a bit of standing.
Exactly. And her story is that she managed to convince her guide to let her explore this area described as a burial chamber, located in the deepest, lowest level of the complex.
So off the beaten path, not the standard tour route.
Definitely not. It was apparently a small, almost hidden opening off one of the walls. And according to her very vivid recollection, she, along with 3 other people, had to actually crawl through a low, narrow passage to even get there.
Crawling through a narrow passage sounds claustrophobic already.
Imagine emerging from that crawl space onto what she described as this precarious ledge, only about 2 feet wide.
2 feet? That's narrow.
Very. with a sheer drop, she estimated, of 50 feet or more on her right and just the cave wall to her left.
Wow. Okay, so she's on this tiny ledge deep underground. What happens next?
She holds up her candle. She mentioned it was half burnt, adding to the atmosphere, holds it higher into the dimness, and that's when she sees them.
Yeah.
Approximately 20 figures. Tall, thin, humanoid figures. They reportedly emerged from an even deeper opening below her ledge, moving silently.
How tall are we talking?
She estimated, and this is astonishing, 20 to 25 feet tall.
20 to 25 feet?
Yeah,
That's enormous. Hard to even picture.
it really is. She said their heads reached about halfway up the opposite wall of the cave. They walked slowly, she said, in single file, with these long, deliberate strides.
Silent, single file. Creepy.
And then, almost like it was coordinated, they stopped. They turned, raised their heads towards her direction on the ledge,
Oh, man.
and simultaneously raised their arms. Beckoning to her, she described it with their palms turned down. Her words were something like snatching or feeling for something.
That's incredibly specific and chilling. Snatching or feeling.
Unsurprisingly, Jessup fled. She got out of there in terror.
I don't blame her one bit.
But the account doesn't end there. It gets even stranger. When she returned to the Hypogeum days later, wanting answers or maybe just to confirm what she saw,
Yeah, what did they tell her?
she was informed that the tunnel, the very passage she'd crawled through to reach that ledge, no longer existed.
What? How does a tunnel just not exist anymore?
Exactly. And perhaps even more unsettling, she said no one, not the guides she spoke to before, not anyone else she asked, would say a single word about what she claimed to have seen. Complete silence. Stonewalled.
Okay, that is a truly chilling narrative. And you can immediately see how that sparks what some might call a fringe interpretation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's tailor-made for it.
The idea that Jessup's account isn't just a ghost story, but points to a suppressed race of subterranean giants, maybe still hidden down there in Malta today, it's incredibly compelling.
It really taps into that primal human fascination with hidden worlds, lost races, things lurking just beneath the surface.
But we have to balance that. When we look at the broader picture, our research shows that extensive archaeological study of the Hypogeum hasn't found any evidence of such secret passages, and popular opinion generally questions the literal truth of Jessup's story.
Right. A quick search for Ms. Jessup, as our research notes, mainly just brings up this specific account, repeated in various forms online. There's no independent corroboration or physical evidence found within the extensively mapped and documented Hypogeum itself.
So the physical evidence isn't there for the tunnel or the giants. But okay, let's pause on the literal interpretation for a second. Our research uncovered some really intriguing alternative ways people look at this story.
Oh, like what?
Could this story be something else entirely, like maybe an oracle or a riddle, a kind of coded message?
Symbolic rather than literal.
Exactly. Could it be a symbolic way of saying that they, whoever or whatever they represent, are still here, biding their time in the cracks of our stories, waiting, keeping a watchful eye on us, even if not in a literal physical sense down in those tunnels?
That's a really interesting take. It shifts the focus from physical reality to maybe a psychological or symbolic reality.
Yeah.
The persistence of the idea itself.
Yeah. It definitely leaves you with this lingering sense of profound mystery, doesn't it? Hinting at things just beyond our current grasp, whether they're physical giants or something else entirely.
It certainly does. A powerful story, regardless of how you interpret it. Okay, so from those ancient sealed chambers under Malta, let's shift focus. We're heading across the globe now to North America. Specifically, we're looking at the really intriguing Paiute legends.
The Paiute legends, right. I remember reading about these. The Siteka, wasn't it?
Exactly. The Siteka. The name translates roughly to tool eaters, apparently referring to fibrous water plants they used to build rafts.
Tool eaters, okay. And the legends describe them as
a tribe of red-haired giants. And not just giants, but cannibals.
Red-haired cannibal giants. Okay, that's memorable.
Yeah, definitely. According to Paiute oral traditions, these Siteka terrorized the local Paiute tribes. Constant warfare, capturing victims for food.
So a genuine threat in their history, according to the stories.
Very much so. The legends recount this pivotal moment where the Paiute tribes finally had enough. They banded together, united against the Siteka, and managed to corner them in this large cave system.
Ah, the cave. This sounds familiar.
Right. To eliminate the giants, the Paiutes supposedly piled brush tool reeds, perhaps over the main cave entrance, and set it ablaze. The fire and smoke either killed the giants inside or force them out to be killed, effectively ending the reign of the Saitika.
Wow. A pretty dramatic end to the story, passed down through generations, you said.
Passed down through generations, yeah.
Yeah.
Painting this vivid picture of a truly fearsome adversary from their past.
Now, what makes these legends so compelling, and why we're talking about them, is how they seem to connect with actual archaeological discoveries, right?
Precisely. It's where folklore and physical findings seem to intersect, or at least brush up against each other.
Our research mentioned a mining engineer, John T. Reed, back in 1886.
Yeah, Reed. He was actually told these exact stories by local Paiute people. He was intrigued enough to go check out the cave mentioned in the legend's Lovelock Cave.
And did he find anything?
He reported finding nothing significant at that time. But the story doesn't end there. Fast forward to 1911.
Okay, what happens in 1911?
Guano miners. They started extracting bat guano from Lovelock Cave for fertilizer. It was big business back then.
Right, guano mining was huge.
And as they were digging out the guano, sometimes going quite deep, they began unearthing things, significant things.
Like what? Bones, artifacts.
Both, and more. They found large bones, larger than average, reportedly. They found oversized sandals. Some accounts mention them being like 15 inches long.
15-inch sandals. That would fit a pretty big foot.
Definitely. They also found intricately woven baskets, various weapons and tools, and even these incredibly well-preserved ancient duck decoys made from reeds.
Duck decoys. That suggests a pretty sophisticated culture living there, not just, stereotypical cavemen.
Exactly. But the most striking discovery, the one that really grabbed headlines and ties back to the legends, was a mummy, found in the north-central part of the cave, buried about 4 feet down.
A mummy. And what was remarkable about it?
It was described as being 6 feet, 6 inches tall. Which is tall, certainly, but maybe not giant. But the key detail, the one the miners emphasized, and that got reported, its hair.
Let me guess. Red.
Described as distinctly red.
Distinctly red. Okay, that clicks right into the Paiute legend of red-haired giants.
It absolutely does. And this is where the interpretations really start to diverge, creating this fascinating tension.
Between the legend believers and the skeptics.
Pretty much. You have some theorists who immediately connect these finds, especially the tall mummy, the large bones, the oversized sandals, and crucially, the reported red hair directly to the Saitika giants of Paiute legend.
It seems like a perfect match from their perspective.
It really does. They see the red hair as powerful corroborating evidence, validating the oral tradition.
But what's the counter-argument? I assume mainstream science has a different take.
The common counter-argument, especially regarding the hair, is that red hair can simply be a post-mortem effect. Caused by the specific chemical conditions in the soil or guano over long periods of burial. It's a known phenomenon called taphonomy changes after death.
So the hair wasn't necessarily red in life, it just turned that color after burial.
That's the standard explanation. However, our research adds a layer of complexity here that the proponents of the giant theory often point to.
Which is?
The Paiute legends specifically mention their adversaries having red hair while they were alive. It wasn't just a description of remains found later, it was a characteristic noted in the oral history of the conflict.
Ah, okay. So the legends themselves specify red hair in life. That does complicate the simple soil staining explanation, doesn't it?
It does make it less straightforward. And adding even more fuel to the fire are these persistent claims, hard to verify now, of course, that some of the more unusual skulls or remains found at Lovelock Cave were removed from the site. Taken away, possibly by institutions or private collectors, and never seen again.
The missing evidence trope again, like the skulls in Malta.
Exactly. For those who believe in the giants, this looks like a potential cover-up, a suppression of evidence that doesn't fit the standard narrative.
And the mainstream scientific view
Generally argues that the skeletal remains found at Lovelock, when properly analyzed, fall within the normal range of human variation for the period and region. Maybe some tall individuals, sure, but not a distinct race of giants. And the artifacts, while impressive, are seen as consistent with known prehistoric cultures of the Great Basin.
So misinterpretations, maybe some exaggeration, combined with the ambiguous hair color.
That's the prevailing scientific view. But it's undeniable how remarkably the legend and the archaeological finds seem to align, at least on the surface, even if the interpretations ultimately lead in very different directions. It leaves you wondering.
Okay, so Lovelock Cave is one really compelling, if ambiguous, case. But what if it's not just one cave? What if the pattern is bigger?
And that's exactly where this next part of our research takes us. It's honestly quite staggering when you look into it.
We're talking about those old newspaper reports, right? From the 1800s, early 1900s.
Exactly. Not just a few scattered articles. We're talking about hundreds of newspaper clippings from local papers all across America, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, California. The list goes on and on.
Hundreds of reports. And what were they reporting consistently?
Discoveries of human skeletons of remarkable size, often found in burial mounds, caves, or just during excavation work. And the heights reported are consistently large, typically ranging from 7 feet up to, in some accounts, 10 or even 12 feet tall.
7 to 12 feet. That's well beyond normal human height variation, especially consistently reported like that.
Way beyond. And it wasn't a rare occurrence, according to these papers. It seems like finding these unusual skeletons was reported fairly often for several decades.
The sheer volume is what's striking, isn't it? It forces you to ask, even if you're skeptical, what was going on. If even a small fraction of these reports were accurate, what does that mean for our understanding of who lived in North America before recorded history?
Precisely. It challenges the standard narrative significantly.
Our dive into this material, it showed a fascinating range of details in these reports. It wasn't just found a tall skeleton.
No, definitely not. Many accounts gave specific descriptions. For instance, back in Ohio, near Kano, the reports mentioned finding skulls so large they could supposedly fit over an ordinary man's head.
Fit over the head. Wow.
Yeah, and jawbones that could fit around a person's face, with the other bones being proportionately large. They estimated something like 2,000 to 3,000 graves in that one location.
2,000 to 3,000. That's a massive burial site.
Huge. Then you have West Virginia near Parkersburg. A cave discovery, reportedly behind a stone door, contained numerous skeletons, including 2 specifically described as being of gigantic stature, quote, at least 12 feet high.
12 feet? That's hitting legendary proportions.
It really is. And up in Michigan, Montcalm County, there was a report of an 11-foot skeleton. The account even gave measurements, claiming the distance from the top of the skull to the top of the thigh bone was 5 feet 5 inches. And again, an immense jawbone mentioned, supposedly large enough to fit a normal jaw inside it.
These specific details, even if we question their accuracy now, make the accounts feel very concrete, don't they?
They do. They weren't vague. And beyond just height, some reports mentioned unusual skeletal features.
Like what?
We found multiple mentions of double rows of teeth. For example, in Wisconsin, near Potosi, skeletons reported as 7.5 and 8 feet tall were described as having jaws filled with double rows of teeth.
Double rows of teeth? That sounds very strange.
Very strange. Similar reports of double teeth came out of New York and Indiana as well. It's a recurring peculiar detail in some of these accounts.
And what are the skulls themselves? Were they described consistently?
Not really, which is also interesting. Descriptions varied quite a bit. Some reports, like findings from Santa Catalina Island in California, mentioned skulls that seemed ape-like, with retreating foreheads.
Ape-like?
Yeah. But others from the same area were described as large, but with high foreheads, suggesting high intelligence according to the thinking of the time. We also saw descriptions like skulls being flat on top or having no seam, maybe referring to fused sutures. It's hard to tell now. The descriptions are all over the place, anatomically speaking.
So, tall stature, sometimes double teeth, varying skull shapes. And where were these skeletons typically found?
Very often they were unearthed in or near ancient earthworks and burial mounds. That connection is frequently mentioned.
Like the mound builder cultures.
Exactly. Near Collinsville, Illinois, close to the famous Cahokia Mound site, one report describes a massive burial chamber, 70 feet long, containing hundreds of skeletons, some described as gigantic. This was near a huge earthwork structure.
So associating the giants with the builders of these impressive earthworks.
That was often the implication. In Arkansas, the Chickasaba Mound reportedly yielded a skeleton estimated at 8 or 9 feet. The skull was said to be so large it could slip over the informant's head. And in Ohio, numerous mounds, including the iconic Serpent Mound, were reported to contain exceptionally large human remains, sometimes buried with artifacts like copper plates or stone tablets.
The scale of those earthworks is already mind-boggling, connecting them to giant builders. You can see why people were fascinated.
Absolutely. The sheer effort required to build places like Cahokia or the Newark earthworks. Finding giant skeletons nearby would naturally lead to speculation that they were the builders.
Okay, so we have hundreds of these reports spread across decades and states, detailing finds of giant skeletons, often with weird features frequently linked to ancient mounds. What happened to all these bones? This is where the Smithsonian controversy comes in, isn't it?
This is exactly where it gets really controversial. Our research clearly shows these repeated, persistent claims and accusations leveled against the Smithsonian Institution.
The claim being
That the Smithsonian systematically collected these anomalous remains, these giant skeletons from all over the country, often stepping in after local discoveries were reported, and then made them disappear, either quietly discarded them, locked them away in inaccessible archives, or otherwise suppressed the evidence because it fundamentally contradicted the established narrative of human evolution and the history of Native Americans.
basically a massive institutional cover-up to protect the scientific orthodoxy of the time.
That's the core of the conspiracy theory. It's a very potent narrative with the powerful institution hiding the truth.
But there's a strong counter-argument, right,
Sure.
from the Smithsonian itself and mainstream science.
Absolutely, and it's important to present that clearly. We found records, for instance, of Alois Hrdlicka, who was a very prominent curator at the Smithsonian in the early 20th century.
Hrdlicka, right. He was influential in physical anthropology.
Very. And in 1934, he explicitly addressed these reports of giants. He flat out rejected the existence of a distinct race of giants, defined them as 7 to 8 feet tall or more.
So what was his explanation for all the reports?
He attributed them to several factors. Firstly, what he called the will to believe, people wanting to find something extraordinary. Secondly, the frequent misidentification of animal bones.
Ah, like mistaking mastodon bones for giant human bones?
Exactly. That was apparently quite common before anatomical knowledge was widespread. Think about finding a massive femur bone without expertise. You might assume it's human. He also blamed the errors of, quote, amateur anthropologists, local enthusiasts who maybe got carried away. Hrdlicka even stated that reports like these came into the Smithsonian 2 or 3 times per month.
2 or 3 times a month. Wow. So he saw it as a common but ultimately mistaken phenomenon.
That was his official stance. He framed it as errors in observation and interpretation, not genuine giant remains.
What about that other detail that pops up in these stories, the bones crumbling to dust?
Ah, yes, the disintegrating bones trope. That features heavily in many of these accounts. The story often goes, these massive skeletons are found looking perfectly preserved underground, but the moment they're exposed to air or handled, they just crumble into dust. Poof, gone, making proper collection and verification impossible.
Convenient, some might say.
Extremely convenient for explaining why there's no physical proof left. We saw this in the account of Aaron Wright's skull in New Salem, Ohio, supposedly huge, worn as a mask, then crumbled. But then, confusingly, other accounts later described the same bones as being abnormally small, belonging to midgets.
Wait, the same bones were described as both giant and midget?
According to different reports. It highlights the unreliability and contradictions rife in some of these historical accounts. Another example was from Pulaski County, Indiana. Very large and strong, bones just crumbled away upon exposure. It sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, doesn't it?
It really does, like something designed to prevent scientific analysis.
And then there's the more modern layer to the conspiracy theory involving NAGPR.
NAGPR. That's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act from 1990, right?
Correct. A significant part of the conspiracy narrative claims that NAGPR was actually deliberately designed or used as a tool for a cover-up.
How so?
The idea is that by classifying these giant skeletons as Native American remains, even if they didn't fit typical Native American morphology, according to the theorists, the act required them to be handed over to tribes for reburial, thus removing them from public or scientific scrutiny forever, hiding the giant evidence under the guise of respecting indigenous rights.
That's a pretty serious accusation. What's the counter to that?
Well, our research clarifies a few key points. Firstly, NAGPRA primarily applies to federal lands and institutions receiving federal funding. It doesn't automatically cover discoveries on private or state land. Secondly, the repatriation process under NAGPR is actually documented. There are records of consultations and reburials. It's not some secret process designed for hiding things. It's about returning ancestral remains and sacred objects to affiliated tribes. Claiming it's a cover-up for giants ignores the actual intent and documented practice of the law.
Okay, that context is important.
And then there's the argument about scientific motivation. It's often said, and our research reflects this viewpoint, that science isn't afraid of the truth.
Meaning?
Meaning that the scientific community, ideally, thrives on new discoveries, even ones that overturn existing theories. Finding verifiable proof of a race of giant humans wouldn't be something to suppress. It would be absolutely revolutionary.
A career-making discovery, as the outline mentioned.
Exactly. The Nobel Prizes, the fame, the complete rewriting of human history. The incentives for a scientist to reveal such a finding would be enormous, arguably far outweighing any incentive to participate in a cover-up.
That makes sense. Why hide the biggest discovery imaginable?
That's the logic.
Yeah.
However, to be fair, we should also acknowledge the counter-criticism. Some accuse mainstream academia or certain figures within it of being too quick to dismiss anomalies.
Like ignoring evidence that doesn't fit the textbook.
Sort of. The accusation is that it can be easier to cry fraud than to investigate something that challenges deeply held beliefs or career-long work. There's an inherent conservatism in any established system, including science. So while a massive conspiracy seems unlikely, the possibility of bias or dismissing inconvenient data, that's a debate that continues.
It highlights that tension, doesn't it, between established knowledge and potentially paradigm-shifting evidence. It's a complex picture.
Very complex. Hundreds of reports, institutional denials, crumbling bones, conspiracy theories. It's a historical rabbit hole.
Okay, so we've waded through those often confusing and contradictory historical accounts from North America and the Malta story. But what happens when we zoom out even further? Look beyond just the last few centuries.
Right. We start looking at the really deep history, the ancient texts and folklore from cultures all around the globe. And what do we find?
Giants. Lots of giants.
Exactly. It's not just a localized phenomena. The presence of colossal beings in foundational texts and myths is incredibly widespread. It's almost universal, in fact.
Which leads to that fundamental question. Are these just symbols? Are they powerful metaphors, allegories, ways to explain natural forces or teach moral lessons?
Or could they be something more? Could they be like fragmented memories, distorted echoes of a real ancient race, or perhaps real encounters with exceptionally tall individuals passed down and magnified through millennia of storytelling?
It's a compelling thought. Where do we see these echoes most strongly?
Well, the biblical references are probably the most well-known in Western culture. You have the Nephilim.
The Nephilim.
Yeah.
Genesis, right. There were giants in the earth in those days.
Precisely. Described as large and strong. The translation itself is debated, sometimes giants, sometimes the fallen ones. Their origin is also debated within theological circles.
Fallen angels mating with humans, is that one interpretation?
That's a prominent one, yeah. Particularly drawing from extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jubilees. These texts really flesh out the Nephilim narrative, describing them as these part angel, part human hybrids, beings of exceptional size, power, ability, but also often profound wickedness, leading to divine judgment like the Great Flood.
So not just big, but supernaturally significant.
Very much so in those traditions. And beyond the Nephilim, the Old Testament mentions others. Goliath, of course, the famous Philistine warrior David fought.
How tall was Goliath supposed to be? Over 9 feet.
The text says 6 cubits and a span, which translates to something over 9 feet tall, a true giant by any measure. And then there were other groups, like the Anakim and Og, the king of Bashan, who is described as the last of the Rephaim, another giant race whose bed was supposedly enormous. These figures were depicted as formidable, towering adversaries that terrified the ancient Israelites.
Okay, so the Bible has multiple references. What about other ancient cultures?
Oh, they're absolutely packed with giants. If we look at Sumerian, Greek, Norse, and Hindu traditions, the theme is everywhere.
Greek mythology definitely has its share.
It really does. You've got the Laestrygonians, these man-eating giants Odysseus encounters in Homer's Odyssey.
Right, they destroyed most of his fleet.
Then there are the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. Truly monstrous beings, each supposedly with 50 heads and 100 arms.
50 heads and 100 arms. Hard to even visualize.
I know. Born from Uranus, heaven, and Gaia, earth, they were so fearsome even their father imprisoned them. But they later helped Zeus and the Olympians overthrow the Titans in that epic cosmic battle, the Titanomachy.
So giants playing a role in the very creation and ordering of the cosmos.
Often, yes. You also have the Gaegenes, a race of 6-armed giants encountered by the Argonauts, and, of course, the Cyclops.
The one-eyed giants. Famous for.
Well, Polyphemus, who trapped Odysseus, is the most famous individual. But as a group, they were known as master craftsmen who forged Zeus's thunderbolts. And crucially, later Greeks attributed the construction of massive ancient stone walls, like those at Mycenae and Tiryns, to the Cyclops. They called them Cyclopean walls, because they couldn't imagine how normal humans could have built them.
Ah, so connecting giants directly to unexplained megalithic architecture again.
Exactly, that connection is ancient. And finally, you have the Titans themselves, the primordial deities who preceded the Olympians. Colossal beings, often associated with raw, elemental power, cosmic upheaval, and ultimately divine punishment when they were overthrown by Zeus and imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld.
Okay, that's a lot from Greece. What about Norse myths?
Norse mythology starts with a giant, Ymir, the primordial being whose immense body was used by Odin and his brothers to create the world after they killed him. Mountains from his bones, seas from his blood.
The world literally made from a giant's corpse. That's epic.
It is. And most of the other giants, the Jotuns or frost giants, supposedly drowned in the flood of Ymir's blood. They remain figures of chaos and opposition to the gods throughout Norse stories.
And Hindu traditions.
Our research notes their inclusion in this global pattern, though we didn't pull specific examples for this discussion. But the core theme remains consistent across these vastly different cultures. Myths featuring colossal beings, often linked to creation, destruction, cosmic battles, or divine judgment. They represent something fundamental, something primordial.
So what does this universality mean? Does it point towards a shared historical reality or something else?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Our research touched on this concept called the folkloresque.
Folkloresque, what's that?
It's the idea that some cultural expressions feel like ancient folklore. They have that resonant, timeless quality, even if they didn't strictly originate from deep oral tradition. They might be more recent creations inspired by folklore or old stories adapted for new contexts.
So giant stories might persist because they just work. They resonate with us.
That's part of it. The idea is that these stories stick around because they're captivating, they feel believable within their own logic. They're often told by figures of authority, like sacred texts or elders, making them seem true. Or perhaps, maybe they were rooted in some kind of truth or historical event, however distorted it's become over time.
Could real-world phenomena have helped keep these stories alive? Like finding huge fossil bones or encountering individuals with gigantism?
Absolutely. That's a very plausible theory. Imagine ancient people digging up massive mammoth or dinosaur bones. Without paleontological knowledge, what would they think?
Giant humans or monsters.
Exactly. Or encountering a rare individual who was 7 or 8 feet tall due to a pituitary condition. In a world where average height was much shorter, such a person would seem truly gigantic, easily fueling or confirming existing myths. These occasional real-world anchors could absolutely reinforce the ancient stories, giving them perceived validity and keeping them relevant.
So it could be a mix. Ancient memories, symbolic narratives, reinforced by real-world discoveries or anomalies.
It could be.
Yeah.
Or maybe these are just incredibly ancient stories, Paleolithic narratives passed down and reshaped for tens of thousands of years. Or perhaps they're powerful archetypes, fundamental ways humans think about power and the unknown that have just been reinvented independently in different cultures across time. It's hard to definitively say, but the persistence itself is fascinating.
Following that thought about cyclopean walls, if these giant stories aren't just myth, could they connect to those incredible feats of ancient engineering we still can't fully explain?
That's a major leap some researchers and theorists make. It circles back to that fundamental, nagging question. How on earth did ancient civilizations, supposedly with limited technology, no cranes, no power tools as we know them, manage to quarry, transport, and precisely place stones weighing not just tons, but hundreds, even thousands of tons?
When you look at some of these sites, the scale is just mind-boggling.
It truly is. Think about Baalbek in Lebanon. The Roman temples there are impressive enough, but they're built on top of a much older platform containing the trilithon stones.
The trilithon. 3 massive blocks, right?
3 colossal limestone blocks, each estimated to weigh around 800 tons, perfectly cut and fitted together. And nearby in the quarry lies the unfinished stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons. And another even larger one found later, maybe 1,650 tons. How are they planning to move these?
It defies easy explanation with ropes and logs, doesn't it?
It really strains the conventional explanations. Then you go to Peru, to Sacsayhuaman near Cusco.
The Inca site with the incredible zigzag walls.
Incredible is the word. Massive polygonal stones, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together with impossible precision, without mortar. The joints are so tight you can't slip a piece of paper between them. And the complex shapes. How did they carve and match them so perfectly?
It looks almost like the stone was soft when they placed it.
That's a common description, yeah. And then there's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Göbekli Tepe. That one really rewrites the history books, doesn't it?
Completely. Dated to around 9,500 BC, it predates pottery, metallurgy, writing, even widespread agriculture. Yet here you have these massive T-shaped limestone pillars, weighing up to 10-20 tons, intricately carved with animals, arranged in complex circular structures. It pushes back the timeline for monumental construction by thousands of years, built by hunter-gatherers, supposedly.
Built by hunter-gatherers, that's the official understanding. It seems almost impossible.
It challenges everything we thought we knew about that period. The sheer scale, the organization required, the artistry, it's profound.
And this is where that fringe belief really gains traction, connecting these impossible feats to giants.
Exactly. The theory proposes that maybe ordinary humans didn't build these earliest, most challenging structures alone. Perhaps giants or beings with forgotten and advanced technology often associated with giants in these theories were the real engineers, the forgotten master builders of early civilization.
Our research even linked this idea directly back to those North American earthworks we discussed earlier.
Yeah, there was that quote suggesting the discovery of giant skeletons near the mounds was ample evidence. They were built by the same people who built megalithic sites in Europe, implying a connection, possibly involving giants.
Let's take the Newark earthworks in Ohio as an example again. Our research detailed its incredible complexity.
Right, the huge circular enclosure connected to an equally large, perfectly squared octagon.
Yeah.
Each about 1,050 feet in diameter.
And the precision. The circumference of the henge matching the perimeter of the square, 3,700 feet. And specific astronomical alignments, like a gateway aligned to the May 1st sunrise.
That level of geometric and astronomical precision suggests incredibly sophisticated knowledge and surveying skills. Our research even mentioned the possibility of Babylonian sacred geometry concepts being present to circle as Sunfather, the square as Earth Mother, hinting at maybe a shared ancient global knowledge system.
And Newark isn't alone. We talked about Cahokia, Grave Creek Mound, the effigy mounds, all requiring immense coordinated labor over long periods.
And that old copper culture in Michigan and Wisconsin, the sheer scale of mining required, estimated by some researchers to need like 10,000 men over 1,000 years.
When you put all that together, the massive stones of Baalbek, the precision of Sacsayhuaman, the antiquity of Göbekli Tepe, the geometric complexity of Newark, the sheer labor of the mounds and mines, you can see why the conventional explanations feel incomplete to some people.
Absolutely. The scale just seems superhuman.
Yeah.
So the idea that beings of greater stature or with advanced knowledge were involved, it becomes an attractive alternative explanation for these profound mysteries.
But we have to ask the critical question.
Okay.
Does the existence of these undeniably amazing, enormous structures actually prove that giants built them? Or does it speak more powerfully to something almost equally amazing? The incredible ingenuity, the organizational capacity, the sheer determination and collective effort of ancient human populations.
That's the crux of it. Are we underestimating our own ancestors? Maybe their social structures, their knowledge of physics and engineering, their ability to mobilize labor were far more advanced than we typically imagine.
It forces you, the listener, to weigh the evidence. Is it more plausible that a lost race of giants existed and built these things, or that ancient humans were capable of far more than we give them credit for? It's a choice between unexplained builders and underestimated ancestors.
A really important point. The awe these places inspire is undeniable. But connecting that awe directly to giants requires a leap of faith not supported by direct archaeological proof of the giants themselves at these sites. Its interpretation layered onto mystery.
So it's clear this fascination with giants, whether they're ancient builders or mythical figures, hasn't faded away. It's definitely not just confined to history books or archaeological digs.
Not at all. The idea persists strongly right into the modern era. We still hear claims today, often circulating online, about oversized skeletons being discovered in remote caves, deserts, or construction sites somewhere.
And the way these claims spread has changed dramatically, hasn't it, with the internet?
Oh, completely. The digital age has poured gasoline on the fire. What used to be a local newspaper story or a rumor passed by word of mouth can now go global in hours.
We see those viral photographs all the time, right? Images showing what look like enormous human skulls or femurs being excavated.
All the time. And many of these images are incredibly compelling at first glance. They look real. But so often, they're later proven to be fakes.
Fakes? How?
Usually Photoshop. Clever digital manipulation. Sometimes they're photos from legitimate archaeological digs of normal-sized remains, just distorted or with giant figures added in. Other times, they might be sculptures or movie props presented as real finds.
And yet, even after they're debunked, they keep circulating, don't they? Shared without context or verification.
Exactly. The image itself is powerful, and the debunking often doesn't travel as fast or as far as the original sensational claim. The digital age has undeniably amplified the reach of these giant narratives, making it incredibly easy for unverified or outright false information to spread like wildfire.
And it's not just photos. Our research mentioned the rise of YouTube myths, fringe forums.
Yeah, you have entire online ecosystems dedicated to these topics. YouTube channels presenting compelling documentaries, but often based on speculation or misinterpretations rather than solid evidence. Online forums where unverifiable eyewitness accounts are shared and treated as fact. It creates this kind of echo chamber effect.
An echo chamber for ancient mysteries where belief can easily trump evidence.
Precisely. It reinforces pre-existing beliefs and makes it harder for critical perspectives to gain traction within those communities.
And this makes it incredibly difficult for anyone just trying to understand the topic, right? How do you sort the wheat from the chaff?
It's a huge challenge. Our research pointed out how those old newspaper accounts we discussed, the ones from the 1800s, are often recycled online today.
Presented as definitive proof.
Often, yeah. Taken out of their original context, ignoring the fact that many were based on misidentified animal bones, like mastodons, or were sometimes even admitted hoaxes at the time, designed to sell papers or entertain. But now, presented digitally, they gain this veneer of historical authenticity.
Like the Cardiff giant story you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The Cardiff giant was a massive hoax from 1869. A 10-foot-tall, petrified man supposedly dug up in Cardiff, New York. People flocked to see it, paid money. It became a national sensation.
Even though it was just a gypsum statue.
Just a statue commissioned by a guy named George Hull, specifically to fool people and make money, partly as a prank on a fundamentalist preacher. It perfectly illustrates how powerful the public's desire to believe in something extraordinary can be, leading to widespread acceptance of what was essentially fake news, 19th century style.
So history repeats itself, just with faster technology.
Pretty much. It really underscores the challenge for you, the listener, today. When you see a compelling image or read a fascinating account online about giants, how do you distinguish between genuine curiosity, honest mistakes, and deliberate misinformation or hoaxes? Critical thinking, checking sources, looking for corroborating evidence. It's more important than ever.
Skepticism is a key tool in navigating this landscape.
A necessary tool, yeah. Especially when the stories are so inherently captivating.
Okay, so we've navigated the myths, the legends, the historical reports, the modern claims, the hoaxes. Let's bring it back to the ground floor. What does established mainstream science say about all this?
Right. Let's look at the scientific consensus, based on decades of biological anthropology, archaeology, and paleontology.
And the bottom line is?
The bottom line, stated clearly and consistently in our research, is that no confirmed human remains significantly exceeding the known range of human height variation have ever been verified by modern, rigorous scientific methods.
So no scientifically accepted evidence for a race of, say, 10-foot-tall humans?
None. The upper limit seems fairly well established. We mentioned Robert Wadlow earlier, the tallest person medically documented in history.
Right. 8 feet, 11 inches.
An incredible height, truly exceptional. But his condition was understood medically. It was due to hyperplasia of his pituitary gland, causing excessive growth hormone production. He was a remarkable individual anomaly, resulting from a specific medical condition, not evidence of an entirely separate species or race of giants.
So science can explain extreme height, just not as a separate race.
Exactly. Science offers clear, verifiable explanations for unusual height or strange bone findings, explanations that don't require invoking lost races or rewriting human evolution. The main conditions are gigantism and acromegaly.
Can you break those down quickly?
Sure. Both are typically caused by issues with the pituitary gland producing too much growth hormone. Gigantism occurs if this happens before puberty, before the growth plates in the bones fuse. This leads to excessive growth in overall stature, resulting in genuinely tall individuals, sometimes over 8 feet, but usually with proportional body features.
Okay, and acromegaly.
Acromegaly occurs if the excess growth hormone production happens after puberty, when the long bones can no longer grow in length. So instead of overall height increase, you get enlargement of the extremities, hands, feet, jaw, brow ridges, and changes in facial features.
So these conditions can create people who look unusually large or have distinct features, but they're understood medical anomalies affecting individuals.
Precisely. They affect individuals or, very rarely, might run in families due to genetic predisposition, but they don't indicate a separate race of giants coexisting with Homo sapiens.
Our research had that fascinating example from Ireland, didn't it? Connecting folklore to a specific gene.
Yes, that was a remarkable piece of research. It linked a specific gene mutation, the AIP gene, responsible for pituitary gigantism macromegaly back about 1,500 years within certain Irish lineages.
Tracing it back that far. Wow.
Yeah. They were even able to connect it to Charles Byrne, the famous 18th century Irish giant who stood close to 8 feet tall. His skeleton is still preserved in London. They found he had this mutation, and they could trace it through related families in Ireland, explaining a cluster of acromegaly cases.
So what might have been folklore about giants in that region actually had a specific, traceable genetic and medical basis?
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how a rare but real biological phenomenon can explain stories of unusual height within a population without needing to invent a separate species. Genetic outliers, not mythological beings.
Okay, what about some of the other weird details from the old reports, like the double rows of teeth?
Right, that pops up surprisingly often in those 19th century accounts from places like Wisconsin and New York. From a scientific standpoint, this is almost certainly a misinterpretation or misreporting of dental anomalies.
Like what kind of anomalies?
It can be things like hyperdontia, having extra teeth, known as supernumerary teeth, or maybe persistent deciduous teeth, baby teeth not falling out when adult teeth come in, or perhaps just severe crowding or misalignment that look like a double row to an untrained observer. There's no known condition where humans have actual functional double rows of teeth like, say, a shark. It's biologically implausible for primates.
So, explainable dental variations, not proof of a different species.
Almost certainly.
Okay.
And perhaps the most frequent scientific explanation for the majority of historical giant bone reports. And this is backed overwhelmingly by our research.
Misidentification
of non-human remains, especially large prehistoric mammals.
Right, the mastodon example.
Exactly. Mastodons, mammoths, giant ground sloths, cave bears. Their bones are large and robust. Before paleontology and comparative anatomy were well-developed fields, it was very easy for people digging up these fossils to mistake them for the bones of giant humans.
You find a huge femur, you think giant.
Understandably so, without the proper context. Our research also mentioned things like fossilized tree roots, sometimes being mistaken for bones. And of course, outright fabrications or hoaxes played a role too, driven by profit motives or just the desire for notoriety.
That giant of Castelnau example was interesting too. Initially thought human, later reassessed as likely cave bear.
Yeah, that highlights how scientific understanding evolves. What might have seemed plausible based on fragments in 1890 can be reevaluated with more complete fossil records and better analytical techniques later on, leading to a different, more probable identification. Cave bear bones can certainly look superficially human-like to the untrained eye.
And it comes back to that point about scientific motivation, doesn't it?
It really does. It bears repeating. Scientists are generally driven by discovery. Overturning old ideas with solid, verifiable evidence is how scientific careers are made and how our understanding advances.
Finding actual proof of giants would be the discovery of the century.
Or the millennium. The idea that such a groundbreaking, paradigm-shattering discovery would be systematically and universally suppressed by the entire scientific community, it just doesn't align with how science generally operates, with its inherent competitiveness and drive for new knowledge. There's far more incentive to reveal than to hide, assuming the evidence is genuine.
Okay, so if the scientific evidence for a distinct race of giants is lacking, if the historical accounts are often unreliable or explainable, and modern claims are frequently hoaxes, that brings us back to a really fundamental question.
Why? Why do these stories persist so strongly?
Exactly. If they're not literally true, why do humans, across virtually all cultures and throughout all of recorded history, seem to need giants in our stories, in our myths, in our collective imagination?
It suggests there's a deeper purpose at play, doesn't it? Something beyond just recounting historical events or describing biological possibility.
What could that purpose be?
Well, giants often function as powerful archetypes within the human psyche, within our collective unconscious, you might say.
Archetypes, like fundamental symbols or patterns.
Exactly. They embody big concepts. Often they represent power, overwhelming strength, forces far beyond human scale and control. Think of nature's power. Earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, giants can be a personification of that raw, untamed force.
They can also embody fear and chaos, right? The unknown other, the monster lurking beyond the firelight.
Definitely. Like the Jotuns in Norse myth, representing the chaotic forces of winter and wilderness that threaten the ordered world of gods and humans. They can symbolize the primordial chaos that existed before creation, or the ever-present threat of its return.
But not always negative. Can they represent other things, too?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes they represent a connection to the divine, or are seen as ancestors or progenitors. Think of Ymir, whose body became the world, or the Titans, who were the generation before the Olympian gods. They can symbolize ancient wisdom, immense age, or a link to the sacred origins of the cosmos.
They can also function as ancient warnings, maybe, symbolic memories of real cataclysms or social upheavals.
That's another layer. Stories of battles against giants could be metaphorical retellings of historical conflicts, migrations, or even struggles against natural disasters encoded into myth.
What about the psychological angle? Projection.
That's a fascinating aspect. Giants could be psychological projections of our own desires or fears. Maybe they're aspirational figures representing a lost greatness, a golden age when beings were more powerful, more connected to the earth or the divine. A projection of our yearning for something more magnificent than our current reality.
Or projecting our fears onto them, making them the monstrous other that justifies conflict or defines our own heroism by comparison.
Precisely. Defeating the giant is a classic heroic trope, symbolizing overcoming immense obstacles, whether internal or external. And let's not forget that simple, almost intuitive explanation we touched on earlier, mentioned in our research.
The one about explaining natural features.
Yeah. The idea that ancient people encountered enormous natural features, huge boulders seemingly out of place, glacial erratics maybe, dramatic geological formations, or even the ruins of previous forgotten civilizations with large architecture.
And the most logical explanation to them was giants.
It's a very human leap of logic, isn't it? How did this massive stone get here? I couldn't move it. My whole village couldn't move it. It must have taken someone enormous. A giant must have thrown it or dropped it here. It's simple, elegant, and explains the unexplainable within their worldview.
So ultimately, these stories persist because they serve multiple functions: symbolic, psychological, explanatory.
And because they're just fundamentally good stories, they're captivating, as we said. They resonate deeply with human experiences of awe, fear, and wonder. They feel believable, often because they're embedded in cultural traditions presented as historical truth by respected sources, or maybe because they tap into something genuinely ancient within our collective memory, however metaphorical that memory might be.
Whether they're echoes of Paleolithic events, constantly reinvented archetypes, or simply fantastic tales, their power over the human imagination is undeniable.
Undeniable. They fill a need, perhaps, a need to make sense of the world, to personify its mysteries, and to connect with something larger than ourselves.
So we've really covered a lot of ground. We've journeyed from those eerie tunnels under Malta to the dusty legends of Lovelockcave, sifted through piles of old newspaper clippings about vanishing skeletons, and explored the colossal figures that stride through global myths. We looked at impossible ancient structures, modern digital trickery, and the clear explanations offered by science.
It brings us right back to that central, maybe unanswerable question we started with.
Was there ever, truly, a distinct race of giants walking the earth? Or are we in the end just chasing shadows? Shadows cast by myth, by misidentification, by wishful thinking, and maybe by our own deep, innate longing for wonder in the world.
The truth, if there is a single truth here, probably isn't a simple yes or no, is it? As this whole episode has shown, it seems much more complex, much more layered than that.
Yeah, it feels like the answer might lie somewhere in the ambiguity. Maybe it's in those genuine genetic outliers, the rare individuals whose height was exceptional due to medical conditions, who then became the seeds for exaggerated legends.
Or maybe the truth is more symbolic, a kind of collective memory, not of literal giants, but of something else. Maybe a memory of our own species' potential, or of powerful natural forces, or even encounters with other hominid species in the very deep past, preserved and transmitted through story, and perhaps even hinted at in the enigmatic stone structures our ancestors left behind.
And we absolutely can't discount the role of simple misinterpretation and misidentification, as science suggests. Very tall individuals being labeled giants, large animal bones mistaken for human. These factors clearly played a significant role in creating the historical record we've examined.
But regardless of the literal biological accuracy behind every single giant story, the fact that these narratives persist so strongly across so many different cultures for so many thousands of years, that tells us something incredibly profound about ourselves, doesn't it?
What does it tell us, do you think?
It speaks volumes about our fundamental human nature, our deep-seated need to explain the things we don't understand, our desire to connect with the past that feels lost, perhaps grander or more mysterious than our present, and our enduring capacity, maybe even our need to find wonder, awe, and meaning in the world around us, even if we have to invent the giants to help us do it.
These stories, whether factual or not, are like a mirror reflecting our own imagination, our fears, our aspirations, our relentless quest to make sense of our place in the cosmos. They shape how we see history, how we see ourselves.
Exactly, and that's why exploring them is so valuable. This journey through tales of giants, it helps us understand not just history or folklore, but human psychology, the enduring power of narrative, how stories shape reality, or at least our perception of it.
It encourages us all, you, the listener included, to keep questioning, keep exploring these fascinating edges of knowledge.
Definitely. And appreciate that the pursuit of understanding often means navigating these really complex interwoven layers of hard fact, ingrained folklore, scientific explanation, and the incredible power of human imagination. It's really simple, but always fascinating. That's it for this journey beyond the known. If the unknown calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. There's so much more waiting to be discovered.